The Great Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with nervous energy. Representatives from 47 species sat in their designated areas, each group whispering among themselves. The emergency session had been called with little warning, and nobody knew what crisis would be discussed today. Admiral Zethkar of the Velthari walked to the center platform. His blue skin looked pale under the bright lights, and his usually confident demeanor seemed shaken. The tall, thin alien activated the holographic display system, and a massive image appeared above the assembled delegates. Members of the council, Zethkar began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. We face a crisis unlike any in our recorded history. The hologram showed an enormous ship drifting through space. It was clearly ancient, its hull scarred and twisted by time and cosmic radiation. Strange energy patterns danced around its surface, and even through the display, something about it felt wrong. This is the Eternal Wanderer, the Admiral continued. A vessel belonging to the Ancients, discovered 3 days ago by our deep space monitoring stations. It is currently on a collision course with the Kepler 442 system. A ripple of concern passed through the assembly. The Kepler 442 system was home to 3 inhabited worlds with a combined population of over 4 billion souls from various species. The ship's trajectory will bring it into the system's gravity well in 72 hours, Zethkar said. Normally, this would not be cause for alarm. However, our scans have revealed something terrifying. The hologram zoomed in on the ship's core, revealing a swirling mass of darkness surrounded by crackling energy. The vessel contains an active, quantum singularity drive. If this ship enters the gravity well of any significant celestial body, the drive will destabilize. The resulting explosion will not only destroy the Kepler 442 system, but create a gravitational anomaly that could affect neighboring systems for centuries. The hall erupted in shocked voices. Representatives stood, demanded answers, asked questions all at once. Admiral Zethkar raised his hand for silence. There is only one solution, he said when the noise died down. A team must board the derelict ship, navigate to its core, and manually shut down the singularity drive before it reaches the point of no return. The Thexian delegate, an insect-like being with compound eyes, clicked his mandibles nervously. What are the mission parameters, Admiral? Zethkar's expression grew even more grim. The ship's interior is a maze of failing systems and ancient defenses. Gravity fluctuates wildly throughout the vessel. Radiation levels are fatal to most known species within hours of exposure. The ship's automated security systems are still active and will attack any intruders. And the quantum field generated by the singularity drive interferes with most modern technology. He paused, letting the implications sink in. Any team attempting this mission would have approximately 6 hours to reach the core, understand ancient technology that we have never fully decoded, and shut down a device that our best scientists barely comprehend. The estimated survival probability for such a mission is less than 3%. The hall fell silent. 3%. Even for species known for their bravery, those odds were essentially zero. The crystalline representative of the Zixnari was the first to speak. Her voice rang like chimes in the wind. The Zixnari must regretfully decline participation in this mission. Our crystalline biology is incompatible with the chaotic magnetic field surrounding the ancient vessel. We would be unable to maintain molecular cohesion in such an environment. The gaseous Nathari delegate spoke next, his voice a whisper of wind. The Nathari face similar limitations. The quantum fluctuations near the singularity would disperse our gas-based forms. We cannot risk the loss of consciousness that would result. One by one, the advanced species of the galaxy offered their regrets. The technologically superior Velthari explained that their quantum-sensitive nervous systems would be overwhelmed by the ship's energy fields. The aquatic Merkathi pointed out that their environmental suits could not function in such extreme conditions. The plant-like Gronari stated that the radiation would kill them within minutes. Even the proud Korthak, the galaxy's premier warrior species, were forced to admit defeat. Their representative, a massive being covered in natural armor, spoke, with obvious shame. The Korthak have analyzed this mission from every tactical angle. There is no strategy, no approach, no weapon that could guarantee success. We cannot ask our warriors to undertake a mission with no hope of victory. As species after species declined, a sense of hopelessness settled over the assembly. The greatest minds in the galaxy had been presented with a problem, and none could find a solution. 4 billion lives hung in the balance, and there seemed to be no way to save them. Then, from the section reserved for newer council members, a voice spoke up. "We'll handle it." Every head in the assembly turned toward the human delegation. Yardan.oyu. Sarah Chen of the Terran Expeditionary Force stood calmly, her brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail, her uniform crisp but unremarkable. She was small compared to most species present, standing barely over 5 feet tall, but something in her posture commanded attention. Admiral Zethkar blinked his large eyes in confusion. "Captain Chen, I must stress that this mission is considered impossible by our finest tactical minds. The humans have been members of the Council for only 15 years. Perhaps you do not fully understand the parameters involved." Chen's smile was slight but confident. "Admiral, with respect, I think we understand perfectly. You need someone to board a dangerous ship, navigate through hostile conditions, and fix something that's broken. That's what humans do." The Korthak representative leaned forward, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Human, your species has shown courage in the past, but this is beyond courage. This is suicide. No glory can be found in meaningless death." "Who said anything about dying?" Chen replied. "We're going to save those 4 billion people and come home. That's the plan." A nervous laugh rippled through some of the alien delegates. The idea that humans could succeed where all other species had failed seemed absurd. Humans were one of the younger species in the Council, with technology centuries behind the Velthari and military tactics that seemed primitive compared to the Korthak. Dr. Marcus Webb, the human mission scientist, stood next to Captain Chen. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and thick glasses that he constantly adjusted. "If I may," he said, his voice calm and professional. "We've reviewed the mission data. Yes, the challenges are significant, but they're not insurmountable. Humans have been dealing with hostile environments, dangerous technology, and impossible odds since we climbed down from trees." The Velthari admiral studied the humans with obvious confusion. "Captain Chen, your species lacks the advanced technology of the Velthari, the environmental adaptations of the Zixnari, the natural armor of the Korthak. What makes you believe you can succeed where others cannot?" Chen exchanged glances with her team, and they all seemed to share some private understanding. "Admiral, every species here has told us why they can't do this mission. They've explained all the reasons it's impossible, all the ways it could go wrong, all the advantages they lack." She paused, looking around the great hall at the assembled representatives of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. "But nobody has asked the right question," she continued. "The question isn't whether we can survive this mission. The question is whether we can let 4 billion people die because something is difficult." The hall fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of beings who had just heard something they didn't quite understand but couldn't dismiss. Admiral Zethkar nodded slowly. "Very well, Captain Chen. The Council will provide whatever support the human mission requires. May fortune smile upon your endeavor." As the session ended and delegates began to file out, many cast backward glances at the small human delegation. Some looked skeptical, others seemed worried, and a few appeared genuinely curious about what these strange bipeds thought they could accomplish. Captain Chen gathered her team around her as the great hall emptied. "All right, people," she said, quietly. "We've got 72 hours to save 4 billion lives and prove that sometimes the best solution to an impossible problem is to ignore the fact that it's impossible." The humans began to plan, and the galaxy watched with a mixture of hope and bewilderment as the species that everyone considered least likely to succeed prepared to attempt the impossible. The human preparation area buzzed with activity that seemed chaotic to alien observers. While other species would have spent days in careful planning and simulation, The humans had immediately begun gathering equipment and modifying their gear, with what appeared to be reckless speed. Dr. Marcus Webb stood in front of a holographic display showing radiation readings from the ancient ship. The numbers would have sent most species running for the nearest shielded bunker, but Webb simply adjusted his glasses and made notes on an old-fashioned paper tablet. "Radiation exposure will be significant," he announced to the team. "We're looking at levels that would kill an unprotected Velthari in about 20 minutes, maybe 15 for a Zixnari." Chief Petty Officer James Park, a stocky man with graying hair and calloused hands, looked up from the equipment he was modifying. "And for humans? We can handle about 4 hours with standard suits before we start getting seriously sick," Webb replied. 8 hours before it becomes life-threatening. That should be enough time if we move fast." The Velthari liaison officer, who had been assigned to observe the human preparations, made a sound like a distressed whistle. "Dr. Webb, those radiation levels will cause permanent cellular damage. Even if you survive the mission, the long-term effects could be severe." Webb shrugged. "That's what medical treatment is for. We've got good doctors back home, and radiation sickness is treatable if you catch it early. Besides, dead is dead, but sick can get better." Engineer Rosa Martinez was examining the structural scans of the ancient ship on another display. The derelict's interior was a twisted maze of corridors, shafts, and chambers that seemed to follow no logical pattern. Gravity fields fluctuated wildly, creating areas where up and down changed without warning. "This is going to be interesting," she said with what sounded suspiciously like enthusiasm. "Look at these maintenance shafts here. They're too narrow for most species, but we can fit. And these handholds every few meters suggest the ancients expected people to climb around manually when the gravity systems failed." The Velthari observer studied the scans with obvious confusion. "Engineer Martinez, those passages were clearly never intended for regular use. They appear to be emergency access routes at best." Rosa grinned, her brown eyes bright with the challenge. "Perfect. That means the ship's defenses probably won't expect anyone to use them. We've been crawling through tight spaces and fixing broken things in hostile environments since we lived in caves. This is just a really big cave with some extra problems." Across the preparation area, Sergeant Lisa Nakamura was testing modified climbing gear. The compact woman moved with fluid grace as she scaled a practice wall, her movements economical and precise. She had been a professional rock climber before joining the expeditionary force, and her experience with impossible handholds and shifting surfaces would be crucial on a ship where gravity couldn't be trusted. "The magnetic boots will help," she said, testing the attachment strength. "But we can't rely on them completely. The metal in that ship is thousands of years old and might not hold our weight everywhere. We'll need to be ready to free climb in zero gravity with full gear." Medic Tom Rodriguez was preparing emergency medical supplies, including treatments for radiation exposure, decompression injuries, and trauma care. His approach was practical and straightforward. Pack everything they might need and hope it would be enough. "I'm loading us up with radiation meds," he announced. "We'll all take preventive doses before we board, and I'll have boosters ready if anyone starts showing symptoms. It's not perfect, but it'll buy us time." The alien observers watched this preparation with growing bewilderment. Where other species would have spent weeks developing new technology or creating detailed tactical plans, the humans were simply adapting existing equipment and accepting the risks as manageable problems to work around. Captain Chen moved between the different work areas, checking progress and making decisions with quick efficiency. She stopped at Park's equipment station, where the chief was installing manual overrides on their electronic systems. "How's it coming, Chief?" she asked. Park held up a communication device that had been partially disassembled. "I'm adding analog backups to everything important. The quantum interference from that singularity will probably scramble our electronics, so when the fancy stuff fails, we'll fall back to simple systems that can't be disrupted." He pointed to a collection of what appeared to be primitive tools: mechanical gauges, manual controls, and simple switches. Duct tape, wire, and determination. It's not elegant, but it works when everything else breaks down. The Velthari observer made another distressed whistle. "Chief Park, those are quite primitive." Surely your technology is more advanced than simple mechanical devices? Park chuckled, a sound that somehow managed to be both amused and slightly dangerous. Son, I've been fixing things for 30 years, and I've learned one important truth. When everything electronic fails, you need something that runs on stubbornness and spite, and humans have plenty of both. Word of the human preparations had spread throughout the station, and representatives from various species came to observe the strange activities. They watched with fascination and horror as the humans casually discussed accepting lethal radiation doses, crawling through spaces barely wide enough for their bodies, and manually operating equipment in environments that would kill most beings. Instantly, a group of Korthak warriors stood at the observation window, their massive forms creating an imposing wall of natural armor and battle scars. These were beings who had never retreated from any fight, who considered death in battle the highest honor possible. Yet they watched the humans with something approaching awe. They speak of radiation poisoning as if it were a minor inconvenience, rumbled War Chief Gorthak. They plan to climb through areas where gravity itself cannot be trusted, and they prepare for this with tape and simple tools. His lieutenant, a younger warrior named Corvin, gestured toward the humans with one of his forearms. War Chief, are they brave or simply insane? Gorthik considered this question while watching Captain Chen calmly discuss the mission timeline with her team. Perhaps, he said slowly, there is no difference. The news networks of the galaxy had picked up the story, and broadcasts across 47 worlds showed the human preparations. The coverage was a mixture of admiration, confusion, and dark humor. A Netheri news anchor, his gaseous form shimmering in the studio lights, reported, "The human team continues their preparations for what military analysts are calling a suicide mission. Their approach appears to blend primitive technology with what can only be described as aggressive optimism." On the Zixnari homeworld, crystalline beings gathered around resonance broadcasters to hear the latest updates. Their reporter's voice chimed like wind through crystal formations. Human psychology remains largely incomprehensible to our analysts. They appear to view certain death as merely another problem to be solved through improvisation and willpower. The Velthari networks took a more scientific approach. Computer models suggest the human mission has a 0.7% probability of success, well within the margin of error. However, humans have historically achieved outcomes that exceed mathematical predictions by significant margins. The reasons for this anomaly remain unclear. As the humans continued their preparations, a pattern became clear to the observing aliens. Where other species saw insurmountable obstacles, humans saw interesting problems. Where others calculated acceptable losses, humans simply refused to accept any losses at all. Where the galaxy's greatest minds had found logical reasons for failure, humans found illogical reasons for hope. Dr. Webb finished his briefing on the ancient technology they might encounter aboard the derelict. "We don't know exactly how their systems work," he admitted, "but all evidence suggests they built things to be repaired. There should be manual controls, backup systems, and emergency procedures. We just have to find them and figure them out." "And if we can't figure them out?" asked Martinez. Webb smiled, the expression somehow both academic and slightly mad. "Then we'll do what humans always do when faced with something we don't understand. We'll take it apart, see how it works, and put it back together in a way that does what we need it to do." The alien observers exchanged glances that somehow conveyed the same thought across multiple species. These humans were either going to achieve the impossible or die in spectacular fashion while trying. Given their reputation, both outcomes seemed equally likely. As the final hours before departure ticked away, Captain Chen gathered her team for one last briefing. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice calm and confident, "in 6 hours we're going to board a ship that's older than some of our civilizations, navigate through conditions that would kill most beings in the galaxy, and manually shut down a device that could destroy star systems." She paused, looking at each team member in turn. "Anyone having second thoughts can leave now, no questions asked." Nobody moved. "Good," Chen continued, "because 4 billion people are counting on us, and we're not going to let them down. We're going to go over there, fix their problem, and Come home. That's what we do. The humans began their final equipment checks, their casual confidence a stark contrast to the nervous energy of the alien observers. As they prepared to attempt the impossible, one thought of the human ship Persistence approached the ancient derelict with careful precision. Through the viewports, the Eternal Wanderer looked even more imposing than it had in the holographic displays. The massive vessel stretched for kilometers, its hull twisted and scarred by millennia of exposure to cosmic radiation and its own unstable singularity drive. Captain Chen stood on the bridge, watching as Chief Park maneuvered their ship toward the least damaged docking port they could find. The twisted metal around the airlock told the story of a ship that had been dying slowly for thousands of years. "Radiation levels are climbing," reported Dr. Webb from his sensor station. "We're still within acceptable parameters, but once we board that ship, the clock starts ticking." Engineer Martinez studied the structural scans one last time. "The docking port looks stable enough, but I'm not guaranteeing anything beyond that. This ship has been through things that would have destroyed most vessels completely." Sergeant Nakamura checked her climbing gear and magnetic boots. "Gravity readings are all over the place. We might be walking on the ceiling half the time and floating in zero gravity the rest. Everyone stay tethered and watch your orientation." The docking maneuver took longer than expected. The Eternal Wanderer's port was designed for ancient technology, and the humans had to jury-rig adapters to make their systems compatible. Chief Park muttered constantly under his breath as he worked, using words that the translation systems wisely chose not to interpret. "Seal looks good," he finally announced. "Atmosphere on the other side is breathable if you don't mind a little radiation with your oxygen. Temperature is cold but not freezing. Could be worse." "Could be better too," muttered Medic Rodriguez, checking his radiation monitors for the 5th time in 10 minutes. The team gathered at the airlock, each member carrying equipment tailored to their specific role. Chen had command gear and emergency supplies. Webb carried scientific instruments and portable computers. Martinez had engineering tools and structural sensors. Nakamura bore climbing equipment and emergency rope. Park lugged communication gear and repair supplies. Rodriguez hauled medical equipment and radiation treatment drugs. "Remember the mission parameters," Chen said as they prepared to cycle the airlock. "We have 6 hours to reach the core and shut down the singularity drive. Stay in contact, watch each other's backs, and don't take unnecessary risks. We're here to save people, not prove anything." The inner airlock door opened with a grinding sound that spoke of ancient mechanisms pushed beyond their design limits. The team stepped into the Eternal Wanderer and immediately understood why other species had declared the mission impossible. The corridor beyond the airlock defied basic logic. What had once been a straight hallway now curved and twisted in directions that hurt to look at. Gravity fields fluctuated randomly, causing loose debris to float in some areas while crushing down with double normal force in others. The walls themselves seemed to shift between metallic surfaces and something that looked almost organic. "The quantum field is affecting the ship's structure," Webb observed, taking readings with instruments that flickered and sparked in the chaotic energy environment. "The singularity drive has been warping reality around itself for thousands of years. The ship is more like a sculpture now than a vehicle." Martinez examined the walls with professional interest. "The good news is that the ancients built things to last. The bad news is that lasting apparently includes gradually becoming something that physics textbooks would call impossible." The team began moving deeper into the ship and immediately encountered their first major obstacle. A section of corridor had been twisted into a spiral that seemed to fold back on itself. Normal navigation was clearly impossible here. "Maintenance shaft," Nakamura said, pointing to a narrow opening near the ceiling. "Looks like it bypasses this whole section?" Park studied the opening with a skeptical expression. "That shaft is barely wide enough for one person, and we don't know where it leads." "It leads forward," Nakamura replied simply. "That's all we need to know." One by one, the team crawled through the maintenance shaft. The space was cramped and uncomfortable, barely wide enough for their shoulders and equipment packs. But as Martinez had predicted, the ship's designers had apparently expected this kind of manual navigation. Every few meters, they found handholds and orientation markers that helped them stay on course. They emerged from the shaft into a vast chamber that had once been some kind of common area. Now it looked like the inside of a kaleidoscope, with surfaces that reflected and refracted light in impossible ways. More importantly, it was guarded. Ancient defense drones materialized from hidden alcoves, their design sleek and alien but unmistakably hostile. Energy weapons powered up with high-pitched whines that made the humans' teeth ache. "Spread out," Chen ordered, and the team immediately scattered in different directions. The drones had been programmed to deal with organized military forces advancing in tactical formations. They were not prepared for 6 humans who split up and attacked from random directions using improvised tactics. Nakamura used her climbing gear to scale the chamber walls, getting above the drone's firing angles. Park improvised an electromagnetic pulse device from spare radio parts, shorting out 2 drones with a burst of static. Martinez simply threw a wrench at one drone's sensor array, temporarily blinding it. Webb, meanwhile, was studying the drone's behavior patterns. "They're following ancient tactical protocols," he called out over the sound of energy weapons. "Predictable, response patterns based on logical threat assessment." "Meaning?" Chen asked, diving behind cover as energy bolts scorched the air above her head. "Meaning they expect enemies to act logically," Webb replied. "They're not programmed to handle humans." Rodriguez proved this point by running directly at the largest drone while screaming at the top of his lungs. The machine's targeting systems, confused by what appeared to be a suicide charge, hesitated for a crucial second. That was long enough for Rodriguez to get close enough to attach one of Park's improvised EMP devices directly to the drone's hull. The remaining drones were dealt with through a combination of human unpredictability and ancient engineering assumptions. The machines had been designed to fight organized armies, not small groups of individuals who ignored conventional tactics and treated certain death as merely another obstacle to work around. As the team moved deeper into the ship, they encountered more challenges that had stymied other species. Gravity fields that shifted without warning were navigated using rock climbing techniques and magnetic equipment. Radiation levels that would have killed most beings were managed through careful dose calculation and medical countermeasures. Ancient security systems were bypassed using maintenance routes and backup passages. The key, they discovered, was not to fight the ship's defenses, but to work around them. The ancients had built their vessel to be maintained and repaired by people who understood its systems. The humans didn't understand the systems, but they understood the basic principles of engineering and problem-solving. "Look at this," Martinez said, examining a control panel that had been locked by quantum encryption. "The ancients put a manual override right here. Simple mechanical switch hidden behind the fancy electronic lock." "Why would they do that?" Webby asked. "Same reason we put manual overrides on everything important," Park replied, throwing the switch. "Because sometimes the fancy stuff breaks, and you need a way to fix things when everything goes wrong. The ship's communication systems were down, its navigation was scrambled, and its structural integrity was questionable, but the ancients had anticipated these problems. Every critical system had backup controls, every major passage had alternate routes, and every security measure had an emergency bypass. The humans began to understand something that the other species had missed. The Eternal Wanderer wasn't just a ship that had been damaged by time and quantum interference. It was a ship that had been designed to function even when damaged. The ancients had built it for people who would need to repair it under impossible conditions. "They built it for people like us," Webb said with growing excitement. "The ancients face the same kinds of problems we do: equipment failures, hostile environments, systems that break down when you need them most. So they designed everything to be fixable by whoever could reach it." As they moved closer to the ship's core, the challenges became more severe. Radiation levels climbed steadily, forcing them to rely more heavily on their medical countermeasures. Gravity fluctuations became more violent, requiring careful movement and constant attention to orientation. The ship's quantum field began affecting their equipment, forcing them to rely on Park's analog backups. But the humans adapted to each new obstacle with the same practical approach they had used since boarding the ship. They treated radiation poisoning as a manageable medical condition, gravity fluctuations as a navigation problem, and equipment failures as an opportunity to get creative with repairs. The alien observers watching through long-range sensors struggled to understand what they were seeing. Every computer model had predicted that the human team would be stopped by the first major obstacle they encountered. Instead, they were making steady progress toward the ship's core, dealing with. The core section of the Eternal Wanderer was unlike anything the humans had ever seen. The chamber stretched out in all directions, its boundaries lost in a haze of twisted space and warped reality. At the center, suspended in a web of energy, conduits and support structures hung the quantum singularity drive. The singularity itself was invisible, a point of absolute darkness that seemed to pull light and matter into nothingness. Around it, reality bent and folded in ways that made the humans' eyes water and their stomachs churn. Energy patterns danced through the air like living things, and the very structure of space seemed uncertain. Radiation levels just doubled, Rodriguez announced, his voice tight with concern. We're now officially in the range where other species would already be dead. Dr. Webb was taking readings with instruments that flickered and sparked in the intense energy field. The quantum interference is off the charts. Most of our electronics are going to fail within the hour. Captain Chen studied the massive chamber, noting the platforms and walkways that led toward the central control area. The path was clear enough, but the environment was beyond hostile. The radiation alone would kill them within hours, and the quantum field was beginning to affect their perception of reality itself. Time check, she ordered. 3 hours, 47 minutes until the ship reaches the point of no return, Webb replied. And about 2 hours before the radiation starts causing permanent damage to our systems. Engineer Martinez was examining the ancient control systems scattered throughout the chamber. Each station was protected by energy barriers and quantum locks that would have taken the galaxy's greatest experts years to decode. But she wasn't looking at the locks. She was looking at the maintenance access points that the ancients had built into every system. They really did build this to be repaired, she said with growing excitement. Look, manual overrides everywhere. Emergency shutoffs, backup controls, even what looks like a complete manual shutdown sequence built right into the primary console, Chief. Park was setting up communication relays to maintain contact with their ship. The quantum interference was playing havoc with their electronics, but his analog backup systems were holding steady. Communications are stable for now, he reported, but I'm not making any promises about how long that'll last. Sergeant Nakamura was studying the path to the central control platform. The walkways were intact, but gravity fields shifted unpredictably throughout the chamber. In some areas, the floor was down. In others, it was sideways or even inverted. And in a few places, gravity seemed to exist in multiple directions at once. Getting to the control center is going to be interesting, she announced. Gravity is completely unreliable, and some of these energy fields look like they could cook us if we get too close. Chen made the decision that would define the rest of the mission. Looking around at her team, she saw 5 people who had already pushed beyond what most species considered the limits of survival. They were tired, radiation sick, and operating in an environment that defied the basic laws of physics. And they still had the hardest part ahead of them. We're splitting up, she announced. Martinez, Webb, and I will go for the control center and work on shutting down the drive. Park, Nakamura, and Rodriguez will hold the perimeter, maintain communications, and prepare for emergency evacuation. Rodriguez immediately protested. Captain, splitting the team in a hostile environment is against every safety protocol we have. So, is everything else we've done today? Chen replied calmly. The radiation levels at the central console are going to be lethal within minutes. I'm not asking anyone else to take that risk unless they have to. Webb adjusted his glasses, a gesture that had become nervous habit over the course of the mission. Captain, I need to be at that console. I'm the only one here who has any chance of understanding ancient technology. Martinez nodded agreement. And I need to be there to handle the manual systems. If the electronic controls fail, we'll need someone who can work with purely mechanical backups. Chen looked at the 3 volunteers, who would stay behind. Park, I need you to keep communications open. If something goes wrong, you're our link to the outside universe. Nakamura, you're our exit strategy. If we need to get out fast, you're the only one who can navigate those twisted passages under pressure. Rodriguez, You're going to be treating radiation poisoning in a few hours. We'll need you functional. The team split up with the efficient calm that had characterized the entire mission. There were no dramatic speeches or emotional farewells. These were professionals doing a job that needed to be done, and they approached it with the same practical attitude they had shown since boarding the ancient ship. Chen, Webb, and Martinez began the dangerous journey to the central control platform. The path led through areas where radiation levels spiked beyond anything their suits were designed to handle, where gravity changed direction without warning, and where the quantum field created visual distortions that made navigation almost impossible. They moved slowly and carefully, testing each step before committing their full weight. The ancient walkways were sturdy, but thousands of years of quantum interference had weakened some supports while strengthening others in unpredictable ways. Radiation spike ahead, Webb warned, watching his instruments flicker and die one by one. We're approaching levels that will overwhelm our suits completely. How long can we survive without protection? Chen asked. At those levels, maybe 20 minutes before we start getting seriously sick. An hour before it becomes life-threatening. Martinez was studying the control platform ahead of them. The good news is that the manual controls look accessible. The bad news is that they're right next to the singularity itself. The radiation there is going to be intense. They reached the central platform and immediately understood why no other species had even attempted this approach. The radiation levels were beyond anything that most biology could survive, even for short periods. The quantum field was so intense that reality itself seemed uncertain, and the ancient control systems were more complex than anything they had ever encountered. But the humans had advantages that other species lacked. They could survive radiation levels that would kill most beings instantly. They could function in environments that would disorient creatures with more sensitive biology. And most importantly, they could look at incomprehensibly complex technology and find the simple solutions hidden within it. Webb began examining the ancient control systems, his instruments failing one by one as the quantum interference overwhelmed their electronics. But he had brought paper notebooks and mechanical pencils, tools so primitive that the quantum field couldn't affect them. I'm starting to understand the shutdown sequence, he called out over the sound of energy discharges around the singularity. The ancients built multiple redundant systems. If the primary controls fail, there are backups. If the backups fail, there are manual overrides. If everything electronic fails, there's a purely mechanical emergency shutdown. Martinez was tracing the mechanical systems with hands that were beginning to shake from radiation exposure. They really did plan for everything to go wrong, she said with professional admiration. This is the most paranoid engineering I've ever seen, and I love it. Chen coordinated their efforts while monitoring their condition and the time remaining. Status report. How long do we need? Give me 30 minutes to understand the shutdown sequence, Webb replied, his voice beginning to show strain from the radiation exposure. 20 minutes to prep the mechanical systems, Martinez added. We don't have 30 minutes, Chen said, checking the radiation monitors that were still functioning. At these levels, we'll be unconscious in 20 minutes and dead in 40. But as she spoke, the ancient ship's final defense system activated. Warning lights began flashing throughout the chamber, and automated systems that had been dormant for millennia suddenly came online. The ship had detected their presence near the singularity drive and was responding with lethal force. Energy discharges filled the chamber, targeting anything that moved. Automated weapons emerged from hidden alcoves, their targeting systems locked onto the human intruders. Most dangerous of all, the singularity drive itself began to fluctuate, its containment field becoming increasingly unstable. The ship is trying to stop us, Webb shouted over the sound of energy weapons and klaxon alarms. The defense protocols are designed to prevent tampering with the drive. Can we override them? Chen asked, diving for cover as energy bolts scorched the air around her. Not in time, Martinez replied, working frantically on the manual controls while automated weapons targeted her position. The defenses are integrated with the shutdown systems. We can't shut down the drive without triggering every security measure on the ship. From their position at the chamber perimeter, Park, Nakamura, and Rodriguez watched the central platform become a war zone. Energy weapons fired continuously, targeting their teammates with lethal precision. The three team members looked at each other and reached the same conclusion simultaneously. "We can't just stand here and watch," Nakamura said. "The captain ordered us to hold position," Park replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "The captain ordered us to complete the mission," Rodriguez corrected, "and the mission is to shut down that drive." Without further discussion, the three humans began. The final moments aboard the Eternal Wanderer unfolded with the kind of desperate precision that only comes when failure means the death of billions. Captain Chen, Dr. Webb, and Engineer Martinez stood at their respective control positions, each bathed in radiation levels that were already causing their instruments to fail and their bodies to rebel. "Synchronize on my mark," Chen called out over the sound of energy weapons and alarms. Her voice was steady despite the chaos around them, the voice of someone who had accepted the consequences of her choices and was determined to see them through. Webb's hands shook as he worked the ancient controls, his vision beginning to blur from radiation exposure. The quantum field was affecting his perception, making the control panels seem to shift and waver like mirages. But his understanding of the shutdown sequence was solid, built on hours of study and the kind of desperate intuition that comes when lives hang in the balance. Martinez was fighting a battle against time and physics itself. The mechanical override systems required precise timing and exact pressure, but the radiation was affecting her motor control, and the quantum field was making simple tasks feel impossible. She gritted her teeth and forced her hands to obey, drawing on years of experience with broken machinery and impossible repairs. Around them, the rest of the team continued their improvised battle against the ship's defenses. Nakamura swung from support beam to support beam, using her climbing gear to reach weapon emplacements and disable them with tools that were never designed for combat. Park crawled through maintenance spaces, short-circuiting targeting systems with electromagnetic pulses that he built from spare parts in desperation. Rodriguez moved through the chaos like a man possessed, treating radiation burns and combat injuries while energy bolts scorched the air around him. His medical training had never covered treating patients in an active combat zone filled with lethal radiation, but he adapted with the same practical approach that had characterized the entire mission. 30 seconds, Chen announced, watching the countdown on her failing instruments. The Singularity Drive's containment field was becoming increasingly unstable, and she could feel the gravitational effects pulling at her body. "Everyone get ready." The ancient defense system seemed to sense that something critical was happening. Weapon fire intensified, targeting the three humans at the control positions with deadly precision. Energy bolts shattered support structures and melted metal surfaces, filling the air with superheated plasma and debris. But the humans had learned something important during their time aboard the ancient ship. The Eternal Wanderer had been built by people who understood that sometimes everything goes wrong at the worst possible moment. The control systems were designed to function even under direct attack, even when the operators were injured or dying, even when the ship itself was falling apart. 15 seconds, Webb called out, his voice hoarse from radiation exposure. "I can see the manual lockouts. They're right where they should be." Martinez had found the mechanical emergency controls, hidden behind panels that looked like decorative elements but were actually designed to be opened by anyone with basic tools and determination. "Mechanical systems are ready," she announced. "Just like every other emergency system on this ship, they're built to work when everything else fails." The final 10 seconds stretched out like an eternity. Energy weapons fired continuously, targeting the three humans with mathematical precision. The radiation levels climbed beyond anything their equipment could measure. The quantum field began affecting reality itself, making simple actions feel like moving through thick liquid. But Chen, Webb, and Martinez had advantages that the ancient defense systems couldn't account for. They were human beings who had been told their mission was impossible, and they had responded by treating the impossible as merely difficult. They were people who had grown up fixing things that were broken, solving problems that had no clear solutions, and refusing to quit when logic said they should. "Mark," Chen shouted. 3 hands moved simultaneously, activating controls that had waited thousands of years for someone desperate enough and determined enough to reach them. The ancient shutdown sequence began with a sound like reality itself. sighing, in relief. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The singularity drive's energy output began dropping as containment fields stabilized and quantum fluctuations dampened. The ship's defense systems, programmed to protect the drive above all else, suddenly found their primary objective changing from preventing shutdown to ensuring safe shutdown. Weapon fire ceased abruptly. Emergency systems activated to contain the residual energy from the drive. And deep within the ship's core, mechanisms that had been designed by the ancients for exactly this situation began the careful process of rendering the quantum singularity safe. But the cost was severe. The 3 humans at the control positions had absorbed radiation doses that would have killed most species instantly. Chen collapsed against her control panel, her body finally giving in to the effects of exposure that should have been lethal hours ago. Webb slumped to the deck, his instruments scattered around him, consciousness fading as his nervous system struggled with quantum field effects. Martinez managed to stay upright long enough to verify that the mechanical systems were functioning properly before her legs gave out beneath her. The rest of the team immediately moved to help their fallen teammates, but the damage was obvious. Rodriguez worked frantically with medical equipment that was beginning to fail, administering radiation treatments and stimulants while monitoring vital signs that told a grim story. "We need to get them out of here now," he announced, his voice tight with professional concern. The exposure levels were beyond anything we can treat with field medicine. Park and Nakamura began preparing emergency evacuation procedures, while Rodriguez worked to stabilize the 3 most critically injured team members. The irony was bitter. They had succeeded in their mission, but the cost might be higher than they could bear. But as they prepared to leave the chamber, something unexpected happened. The ancient ship began responding to their presence differently. Systems that had been hostile moments before now seemed to be offering assistance. Emergency medical protocols activated, providing air that was cleaner and radiation levels that were lower. Navigation systems came online, offering the most direct route back to their ship. "The ship is helping us," Webb managed to say, his voice weak but amazed. "It knows we saved it. It's trying to save us." The evacuation became a partnership between human determination and ancient engineering. The ship's systems provided support and guidance while the humans provided the will to keep moving, despite injuries that should have been fatal. Somehow, working together, they managed what neither could have accomplished alone. The journey back to the Persistence was a blur of emergency medicine, improvised solutions, and the kind of stubborn refusal to die that characterizes human beings at their best. By the time they reached their own ship, all 6 team members were suffering from severe radiation poisoning, multiple injuries, and exhaustion that went beyond the physical. But they were alive. And more importantly, 4 billion innocent beings in the Kepler 442 system would continue to be alive as well. The Galactic Council watched through long-range sensors as the human ship departed from the ancient derelict. The Eternal Wanderer, its quantum singularity drive safely shut down, began a controlled drift away from the inhabited system. The crisis was over, ended by 6 humans who had succeeded where the galaxy's greatest minds had seen only failure. In the days that followed, as the human team recovered in medical facilities that represented the best the galaxy had to offer, representatives from 47 species came to understand something new about their newest council members. Admiral Zethkar of the Velthari was among the first to visit the recovering humans. He found Captain Chen in a medical bed, her body slowly healing from radiation damage that should have been fatal, her mind already focused on writing the mission report that would explain how they had accomplished the impossible. "Captain Chen," he said quietly, "we have analyzed your approach to this mission from every angle. Our computers have run thousands of simulations based on your actions. By every mathematical model, by every logical analysis, you should have failed." Chen looked up from her tablet, where she was documenting the ancient ship's systems for future reference. "And yet here we are," she said with a slight smile. "Yes," the Admiral agreed. "Here you are. Your species lacks our computational abilities, the Zixnari's environmental adaptations, the Korthak's military precision, the Nathari's energy manipulation capabilities. You have no obvious advantages that would explain your success." "Chen," set down her tablet and looked thoughtfully at the alien admiral. "You're right, Admiral. We don't have any of those advantages, but you missed something important in your analysis." "What did we miss?" "You all calculated whether you could survive the mission," Chen explained. "You ran probability analyses on success rates. You evaluated technological capabilities. You assessed biological limitations. You asked all the right questions about whether the mission was possible." She paused, looking out the medical bay window at the stars where 4 billion souls